All right, recording started. So yesterday we got started with start procedure. We discussed what's the advantage of start procedures, and got started with how to create a start procedure with simple start procedure by passing input parameters, right? All right. Now the next thing I want, no, somebody asked me about. We are talking about the advantages, right? So pre-compiled execution plan. So let's take a look at what is that pre-compiled execution plan. So I got the file which was missing yesterday, which is this one. All right, so this is the one I want to show. All right, so hopefully you could able to see this. All right. So when you are executing a SQL statement, so when a new statement comes in, well, I mentioned that first it is going to check whether there is an execution plan available in cache means memory. Cache means memory, right? So there are two type of execution plan exist in memory. One is called as executable execution plan. Second one is called as compiled execution plan. So if I will explain what is the difference between a compiled execution plan and the executable execution plan. So first of all, when a statement comes in, if that it could not find an execution plan, then it is going to parse that statement. It's going to do a couple of other additional steps, which we'll be seeing later: auto parameterization, expand views, query optimization, and then when after doing all these various steps, it is going to generate an executable execution plan. Okay, and then using that executable execution plan, it is going to execute that SQL statement. Now, when you are creating a start procedure, it is for a normal SQL statement, if the execution plan is not available, then it is going to create a new executable execution plan, and then after executing that statement, executable execution plan is going to be stored in memory, so that any other user execute a similar statement, that executable execution plan is going to be used. So let's say second time somebody else execute that statement, it comes into the memory, it find out that okay, that executable execution plan is already there, then it is going to skip all these steps and then directly use that to execute the statement. So the executable execution plans are created as a result of you executing a statement, SQL statement, and at the same time, there is no execution plan available in memory. That is when an executable execution plan is created. Now, when you are creating a start procedure, it is going to create a different type of executable plan called as compiled plan or compiled execution plan. So you can see the difference between a compiled plan and executable execution plan. Executable execution plan means that plan is ready to be executed. Okay, there's no need to there's no further processing needed. That's a ready to use kind of an execution plan. But in the case of a compiled plan is not an actual execution plan. The compiled plan means it is just short of creating an execution. That means the statements are compiled, auto parameterization, query optimization, all those things are done. So it is compiled and ready to generate the execution plan. So that's the reason why when you execute a start procedure, well, those statements contain all the statements inside that start procedure already is having a compiled plan. So it is going to take that compiled plan and it is not going to execute that compiled plan straight away. Instead of that, it is going to come just above that generate execution plan. So after finding out the compiled execution plan, there is one more step needed. That is, you need to generate that execution plan. So that's the difference between a compiled execution plan and an executable execution plan. All right, so let me unmute those who came late. Hold on a second. All All right, you all are unmuted. Let me see who has questions. Mohammed, you have been unmuted. What is the PPT? Well, I haven't covered that PPT yet. I just picked one of the slide from that, but we will be seeing this PPT later, the SQL Server architecture. All right. So any question about the difference between an executable execution plan and a compiled execution plan? Okay. So the advantage of the start procedure is it is pre-compiled execution plan. So when you are creating the SQL, when you're creating a start procedure, it is going to create for each statement, it is going to create a pre-compiled execution plan. And the first time when that start procedure get called, all this pre-compiled execution plan will be converted into an executable execution plan. So that is advantage. Now, why I say it's advantage, because creating that pre-compiled execution plan is an expensive operation. So if it is already pre-compiled, then when you call that start procedure, you don't need to, the SQL Server need not have to spend time and resource to create that pre-compiled execution plan. That's advantage with respect to performance. All right, so I'm going to close all this. All right, so the next example is how to create a start procedure with min and max value. Okay. So I'm going with a simple requirement first, and then we will see more, other start procedure. Please, Sonam, hold on a second. Sonam, you have been unmuted. So my requirement is that I want to create a start procedure which can accept a product ID, and that for that particular product ID, I want to find the number of the total number of unit being sold. I want to also find out what is the total revenue generated by that product ID, and then I want to return that total product sold, product unit sold, and the total revenue generated for that particular product.
Dario?
So yes.
Yesterday class you said like we are covering regarding pre-compiling. You are not covering yet, yes?
Yeah, that's what I just mentioned. The difference between a compiled and pre-compiled, executable execution plan and pre-compiled execution plan.
Oh, okay.
All right. So create a start proc which accept a product ID, a product ID, and return total unit sold and total revenue. Okay. All right. So this is what my requirement is. Now create a start procedure. Create. I'm going to call. Please. Do you have a question, Ankit? Okay. All right. Create procedure, and then the name of the start procedure is going to be dbo dot total sales info, something like that. Right. All right. So the input parameter is going to be, so I need to define the parameter. So the first parameter is going to be an input parameter. So I'm going to say int product ID, and it is going to be an integer. Okay. Now we need to pass two parameters back to the calling program. So this particular start procedure is having an input parameter as well as more than one output parameter. So the input parameter is this. The output parameter is going to be integer total units sold. And this is also going to be an integer. Now, if you are expecting a value more than 32,767, you might need to go for a begin data type 2. All right. So now, by default, when you define a parameter like this, is this an input parameter, or how SQL Engine is going to consider this parameter? Is it by default it is going to be an input parameter, or is it an input output parameter?
Input.
It is all now. By default, it is an input output parameter. Now, if you want to make a parameter as just an output parameter, then you need to explicitly say output. All right. So by specifying this keyword output, you are making this as an output parameter. And then you need to define the second output parameter, which is going to be, it is going to be money, right? And I'm going to say MNY and total revenue generated, or total revenue. And this is going to be a data type of money. All right, so we defined both input and output parameter as begin. All right, so the next step is we need to identify, first of all, we need to identify whether this particular product is been sold at least once. If this particular product never been sold, there is no point in calculating the total units sold and total revenue. So I'm going to say if X is in bracket select star from sales order, pointing to the wrong database. All right, sales order detail, where product ID equals whatever that input parameter is, right? So that is going to be this one. Well, I did not, nobody noticed this typo here. Hold on a second. PRO. So this is if this particular, there is at least one record exists in that sales order detail for that particular product. Well, then what we need to do, we need to say begin, and then we need to calculate some values. But in addition to that, if that there's no record exists, then we need to initialize the value. So it is going to be, so we need to provide a zero value, right? Total units sold, I can say set equals 0, and total amount generated is also going to be 0 if there is no sales for that particular product. Now, if there is a sales, then if I want to get the total revenue generated and total units sold, it is very simple. Select, I'm going to put a star here from sales order detail. And if I want to get the total revenue generated for that particular product, what should I do? Well, first of all, we need, all right, we need to use a group by, right? We can use a group by, but since I'm only looking for one particular product, you don't really need to group it, because anyway, you are not only considering that particular product record. So I can say, if I want to find the total units sold, that is going to be count star, right? And the total revenue is going to be sum of line total, right? Line total. All right, so now we need to assign this value to that appropriate variable. So the count is going to be assigned to that particular variable, and the total revenue is assigned to this particular variable as well. All right. So any questions so far?
Why did you set at the rate in total unit sold equals 0 for the else
Because I
condition?
want to, because if there's no product, is that particular product never been sold, I want to return a 0 value back for
Oh, okay,
both
okay.
output parameter. Okay.
Daniel,
Yes.
is it always necessary to put the else? Because I did some listening today. I didn't put the else, like if else, but it still gave me the same listening, the same result.
I'm sorry. What did you say?
Like use the if else condition. I used the if, but I didn't use the else. I just used begin instead of putting another else there, but I still get the same result.
So instead of else, you put another if condition.
No, well, I just left the else out. I just started from begin.
Okay, so you don't have an else statement. Is that what you say?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. Else is optional.
Oh,
If
okay.
you else is optional, if the first condition, like if the if condition doesn't satisfy, do you want to do something else? That is when you need to provide the else. If the if condition is not satisfied and you don't want to do anything else, then you don't need to provide the else statement. So else is optional. Okay.
Yes, I'm saying that I did that, for example, the second part, but I didn't put the else itself. But I just used begin. I just started from begin,
Uh-huh.
and then,
Yeah, I mean you can initialize that. I mean that's another logic. I mean what we will do is that we initialize it instead of using the if else. What he's
yeah,
saying is that you just put set you initialize it to 0, and
yeah,
then if there is a record available, that's when it go inside that if condition.
yeah.
That's also a programming logic. That's perfectly fine.
Okay.
All right. So where is it? All right. So I'm going to create this start procedure. Here we go. All right. Start procedure is created. Now let's go and take a look at this start procedure. The name is total sales info. Go to database and adventure work, programmability, and start procedures. Machine is a little slow. Total sales info. Expand it, expand the parameter. All right. Well, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I believe I made the wrong statement. When you declare a parameter, and with by default it is going to be an input parameter, but if you want to make it as an output parameter, well, you need to use that output keyword here. Now, what I was supposed to say was, when you say you use that output parameter, that parameter is only going to be an output parameter. Answer is no. By default, all the parameter for a start procedure is going to be an input parameter. When you add that output keyword, it's also become an output parameter. So if the int total units sold is an input output parameter, that means you can pass value into the start procedure through that parameter, as well as the start procedure can return value back to the calling program through that parameter. So it's an input output parameter. Okay, just for your clarification, by default it's going to be an input parameter, but the moment you use the keyword output, it is going to be an input output parameter.
Daniel,
Yes.
can you use the like input say input like the output?
No, you cannot.
When you have
No, you cannot make it just like an input. No, it is by
no,
default.
okay.
It is, if you don't use the output, then it is going to be purely an input parameter.
No, my question is, can you do you have a like input keyword like output?
No, that option is not there.
Okay.
Class videos, sorry, class 22. All right, so let me, now the question is, because this dot procedure is returning value back to the calling program, how do we call this start procedure? Because if I want to call a start procedure which only accept input parameters, it's very simple. Call the start procedure and then pass whatever the value you want to pass as an input parameter. Now, in this case, I want to return the start procedure is returning two values back. So let's see how you can call a start procedure with return value. So exec, and the procedure name is this. And all right, provide the input parameter. The input parameter is this one. I'm going to say equals 777. All right, so that's a product ID. Now the question is, how do I define the input parameter, the input output parameter? Now, because this particular start procedure is going to return value back to the calling program, you need to be ready with a couple of receiving variable. Receiving variable are nothing but the normal variable. The only reason why we call it as receiving variable because you use that variable as a receiving element for the value returned by the start procedure. So you declare two variable here. I'm going to call it as at. Since I want to identify it as a receiving variable, I'm going to say r underscore unit sold. It is going to be integer. Now another variable I need to declare for the total revenue. So that's going to be r underscore revenue, total revenue, and this is going to be a money data type. So you declare two variables here, receiving variables. Now the next step is you need to assign that variable into, hold on a second. The syntax for that is, this is a parameter name, right? Parameter name equals whatever that receiving variable name, comma. The second parameter is this one equals whatever that receiving variable name. Now you might ask a question because you might think that the receiving variable on the left hand side of that equal sign, right? Because that is where the value is going to be received. So most of the people think that it is going to be the other way. For example, it's supposed to be like the receiving variable equals the parameter. Okay, this is what the common misunderstanding is, but this is not the way it has been given, because this is not the ANY total revenue is not only an output parameter, it is an input parameter too. So when you are calling the start procedure, whatever the value of the unit sold, if there is a value for the unit sold receiving variable, well, that value will be assigned to int total unit sold. And once the start procedure completes its execution, then whatever the value stored in that int total unit sold will be returned back to, or will be stored back to the unit sold. So it's like a bidirectional, it's a input output parameter. So the parameter can be passed in both directions. Okay. All right.
Daniel,
Yes.
most of these features only works with SQL 2016. Does it
No,
really?
no. It work with it is there from, I would say, from SQL Server 6.5. This ones.
Oh, so are you talking about 2012?
No. 6.5, the SQL Server 6.5. I don't know when that's like a 1997, 98 period.
Oh, okay. Because yesterday I tried to run a query, creating a table using the identity thing, and it doesn't work on my.
Well, I thought that you were asking me a question about this particular statement. This particular
No.
statement. Yeah,
No,
I mean, Microsoft add additional features in every version, so it depends on which statement you are trying to run.
Okay.
All right. So I'm receiving the output value of the unit sold and total revenue into two receiving variables, and I just want to display that. So if I want to display that, it is going to print the unit sold is going to be this one, and print, and the total revenue is going to be this one. Here we go. Is it clear how to capture a return value back from coming back from start procedure into a receiving variable? Where does we use is it this kind of a statement or done in client side integration with some other point? I mean, the problem with Prakash, the problem with, I mean, you can definitely do this from the side, from the client side application. The problem is that if you're trying to find out what is the minimum sale and maximum sale, how many back and forth traffic needed to identify what is the minimum and maximum, sorry, the total unit sold and the total revenue generated, you need to have multiple statement generated, right? This is start procedure has only one statement. Let's say you have a logic where you want to implement that logic, or if you have a calculation need to be done using data coming from the database, and then in order to perform that calculation you need to retrieve data from 5 different tables. Now if you have 5 different select statement, and then if you execute each of those statement one by one from your client side application, well, for each statement there is going to be a traffic going into the start procedure. This start procedure is going to process your SQL statement, and the output is going to be returned back to the application. So the client server traffic is going to go up. So what we do is that instead of separately executing the statement, you put everything in a start procedure. So entire 5 statements can be executed by calling that start procedure only once.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
Sure. Yes. Do you have a question? Sorry, maybe I misunderstood.
Daniel.
Zoe and Susan, we both are unmuted. Yes.
Can you call this start procedure from another start procedure?
Absolutely. Nested start procedures are certainly possible.
Oh, okay.
You can call start procedure from a trigger. You can call a start procedure from a function, but the only thing is that that start procedure should not have any transactional statement. But as long as a start procedure doesn't have a transactional statement, it can be called from a user-defined function as well.
Okay.
Please mute the microphone. All right. So, what is the normal practice to call start procedure within start? I mean, sometimes, questions from user phase, is it normal we call a start procedure from a start procedure? Answer is yes. I mean, I'm not saying that it is very popular, but in certain cases, if you, let's say I have 2 type of calculation. In my financial application, I want to do certain type of calculations which consist of lot of coding, SQL coding. So you put those 2 calculations as separate start procedure, but the calculation 1 sometimes might need to call the calculation 2, and the result of that calculation 2 need to be used in calculation 1. In that case, the start procedure, the first calculation start procedure might be calling the second calculation start procedure whenever it is needed according to the way the SQL statement is written in the start procedure 1. So we normally go for, instead of putting everything into one single start procedure, we split, especially if you have a very lengthy, complicated calculation need to be implemented. Instead of creating a gigantic start procedure, you will split it into multiple ones, and then from then on top of that you create a master start procedure. From that master you call all this sub start procedures. So I mean, the performance wise you are not going to see any advantage, but the biggest advantage is code reusability, that the code reusability and testing. So for example, if you are not getting the desired result, and then if you want to test certain part of your calculation, and if those calculations are on its own start procedure, just call that start procedure, test it out. So easy maintenance, compartmentalization of the code, and then unit testing, easy unit testing. These are the 2 reasons why you split a large start procedure into multiple small start procedures.
What is the best way to debug a start procedure?
What is that? I'm sorry, I did not hear that. Can you come over again?
What is the best way to debug a start procedure?
We'll be seeing that.
Okay.
Yes, you said. All right. So let me go back here. All right. So you see the result here, right? Now, well, I mentioned that the moment you say output keyword to a parameter, I mentioned that that's an input output parameter, right? But what is the proof for that? So what I'm going to do here is, I mean, just for your informational purpose, I'm going to print the value of these two input output parameter. Print, and this has nothing to do with this logic, but I just want to show you that the value is value. This is an input output parameter. So I just put the print statement there, and I'm going to alter. All right, so the statement get executed. Now, if you come back to the, please mute the microphone, please. So if you come back to, so here I'm going to provide some value for these variables. So I'm going to say 345, and this one I'm going to say 789. Just some values so that we can verify these values get passed into the start procedure. Here you go. All right. So what do you see here? 345 and 789 is printed. If the 345 and 789 is printed, what does that mean? The value is passed into that start procedure, and then it is displayed by my print statement. This is just for testing to show that the value can be passed in to a input output parameter. Clear?
Daniel,
Yes.
we are passing an individual value, but I was curious, is there a way like you can pass input and return output like an array?
Like a?
Array?
I'm sorry, I did not hear that.
I mean the array?
Can you put that in the chat window, please? No, unfortunately, there's no concept of array, but we have something called as table value parameter. You can pass it as a table, but arrays are not supported. That's a good question. I mean, that's one of the things we always miss in start procedure. You cannot pass arrays. Not only in start procedure, in any place in SQL Server, you cannot pass a array. But what you can do is that you can pass a table value parameter.
Okay.
All right, so let's continue our discussion here. Now, my next requirement is I want to create a start procedure. I mean, this is very similar to that cursor, we have done yesterday. So my requirement is that if I want to call a start procedure, I want to create a start procedure. In that start procedure, I want to classify employees based on their vacation hours. So classification group 1 is employees with vacation hours from 1 to 25. Second classification group is 25 or 20, greater than 25 and less than 35. And the second one is less than or equal to 35. And the third category is greater than 35 and or greater than 35. So these are, I want to classify employees like this, and then I want to call the start procedure with what is going to be the incremental vacation hours for each of these categories. So I need to pass in this, and then and see now we'll be seeing that later, Kushbu. So and then at the end, once the vacation hours get updated, at the end you need to return the number of records, number of employees get updated in each of those category back to the calling program. So that's what my requirement is. So let's create that start procedure here. So the start procedure requirement, I'm going to create a start procedure which is going to pass three vacation hour incremental values for three different groups. Okay, so let's do that. Create procedure. Create procedure. The name of the procedure is going to be dbo.emp vacation hour adjustment. Vacation hour. All right, so the parameter is going to be, well, we need to pass three input parameters. So int vacation inc underscore group one. Okay. int vacation group one, and then that is, well, we need to put a ampersand of friend, and it is going to be an integer. Great. Now the second one is going to be for the second group, and then the third group, and we need to slightly modify it here, so it's going to be 2 and this is going to be 3. All right, so I defined three input parameter, which is going to give, it's going to pass the incremental value for each of the vacation hours for each group. Now I want to return the number of records updated in each category. So I'm going to call this one as updated record for group one. It is going to be an integer. This is for group 2 and this is for group 3. All right, so declare three input parameter. Of course, for input parameter, output parameter, you need to use that keyword output, right? All right. All right. Yes. Begin and end. All right, so inside the start procedure, how do we need to, it's very simple. First of all, we need to have three update statements. So the first update statement is going to be update human resource dot employee. Set vacation hours equals vacation hours plus whatever the value you pass in this particular parameter, where vacation hours is less than or equal to 25, or you can say between 1 to 25, doesn't matter. Now, but the question here is, well, this is definitely going to increase, this statement is going to increment the vacation hours of those employees, but how do I know that total number of records updated by the previous update statement? Anyone?
Into the old and
Well, Unity, not the insert. I mean, you can, inserted. This is an explicit statement, so you cannot get that inserted after the explicit, because of the property of the explicit function is, sorry, not the explicit, implicit transaction is the moment that that statement is completed, the implicit transaction is also going to be committed. So outside that implicit transaction, you cannot get deleted or inserted object. So what we need to do here is that there's a system variable called as row count. All right, so the row count is always going to give the total number of, please mute the microphone. So the row count is going to give the total number of records updated or inserted or deleted by the previous DML statement. So the row count is going to give you the total number of records updated, and this value need to be assigned to which variable, which output parameter? This one, right? So I need to assign the value of that system variable to that output parameter. So you got the result here. Now, similarly, I need to do the same thing for other parameters or other categories. So this is the first category. In the second category, all right, so the vacation hour is going to be greater than 25 and vacation hours is less than or equal to 35. So if that's the case, then the total number of vacation hours updated is 2 and the count value is also going to be 2. Now the third one, it is going to be from 35 and up. We don't have an upper limit. For 35 and up, it is going to be 3 here and this is going to be 3. Is it clear? We are doing it for 3 different categories. This is going to be category 1. This is going to be category 2 and this is going to be category 3. All right. All right, so let me go and create this start procedure. Start procedure created. Now, calling the start procedure is very similar to what we have done.
Daniel,
Yes.
all the 3 categories are, is that a different way, or I mean, is there any different name?
There's no name. I mean, we logically grouped the employees based on their vacation hours. All the employees with vacation hours less than 25 is going to be category 1. It's not an official name. We logically did that grouping. Right?
It's a different way, yeah?
Yes, that's right. Okay, so now we need like what we did in the previous case, we need to create a couple of receiving variable. So to make the receiving variable declaration easier, I just copy whatever that actual one is. So declare, and then I'm going to call this one as r underscore. It is going to be an integer. Do the same thing for other ones. All right, so 3 receiving variables are generated here. Call this, and why do we need to declare output variable? Don't we use one variable for? Yeah, you can. That's going to be the next example. I mean, what we did is that's a very good question. We declared we have 3 input parameter and then we also have 3 output parameter. The output parameter purpose is I want to return those records get updated. Now the question is why you want to declare these additional output parameter, because if you make this one as input output parameter, then the vacation hours need to be incremented. That is going to be the input value, and the number of records get updated, that can be the output value. Definitely we could able to do that. We'll be seeing that. Okay.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so the first one, list of parameters are for example, from less than 25, I want to increment that vacation hours by 5. For this one, second category, that is going to be 2. For third category, I want to do it by 1. Okay, so that's what my logic is. So that's a value I'm trying to provide. And we also need to provide we need to capture that output the output parameter. So here you go. So this one is going to be All right. So, and then I want to print it. So I want to see how many records get updated in each case. So I want to print first group, second group, and third group. And third group. All right. So we got everything ready here. Save. And now I'm trying to execute it. All right, so it did not display the actual one. The reason is because, anybody know the reason? We did not put that output keyword here. Just a second, we forgot to put that output keyword there. All right, so let's try it again. Save. All right, this time you can see that there are 47 records get updated in group 1 and 53 records get updated in group 2 and 217 got updated in group 3 category. Okay. All right, so let's go back to that. Do you guys have any question on this? This is very similar to our first example. Only thing is that right now we are using multiple input and output parameter. Now the question is, do we really need this multiple input output parameter? Because if I declare, instead of having a separate output parameter, what I can do is I can take this one out. Okay, I can remove these parameters and I can make these input parameters are as input output parameter, and then that can be used to pass value back to the calling program. So I made this as input output. Now here then it is going to be
in the next example copy just
oh I'm sorry. Okay, let's do that.
Daniel, is it possible to use the case in here with the 3 update?
Yes, you can use the case statement too. Yes. Whichever conditional branching you want to use, you can. Well, first of all, let me save this. And get rid of the last 3. All right, so this is going to be two. Going to be 3. All right, so it's much better, right? So I made that change, and I'm going to make it as let me create a new one. So MB vacation adjustment, I'm going to call it as underscore new. Okay. All right, so let me save this and then create this start procedure. All right, it has been created. Now calling this start procedure, so instead of giving a direct value here, what I can do is that get rid of this. We don't really need this. Okay. Now I'm going to say for group 1, what is going to be the incremental vacation hour? That is going to be 5. For group 2, it is going to be 2, and then for group 1, it is going to be 1. What is the question? Change the procedure name. Yes, I will change the procedure name. Yes, underscore name. underscore new. Now, instead of explicitly listing the value there,
Daniel, why we are using the receiving variable over here? We can
because
directly assign the value.
no, because it's an input output parameter, right? What we did is that if you look at the start procedure, we are using that original input parameter. We converted that into input output. That was one of the questions. Why we need a separate output parameter? Because if I convert these ones into an input output, then you don't really need a separate output parameter, right?
Yes.
So that's what we are trying to do. So what we did is that original input output parameter, an input parameter, now converted into an input output parameter. Okay. Now, because this is an input output parameter, when you call the start procedure, well, you need to provide, excuse me. Sorry about that. All right. So you need to provide what is going to be the receiving variable. And the way the receiving variable is going to act is that initially when the start procedure is called, whatever the value in the receiving variable is what get passed into the start procedure, because it's an input output parameter. Value can pass both ways. When the start procedure get called, whatever value is there in the receiving variable will be passed into the start procedure, and then once the start procedure execution is over, whatever is there in that whatever the output parameter of the start procedure get assigned back to the receiving variable. It's a bidirectional data traffic.
Okay, and one more question. You write this way, right? With receiving variable and the variable. Can we split this and it will go work as it is, or it will
What do you
give
mean?
error?
What do you mean by split?
I mean, first I write the receiving variable and then equal to the integer vec inc underscore group,
Oh yeah,
and then
that will definitely work. I mean, you can initialize the value separately. That's not a problem.
okay.
All right. So I believe we are set here. Good practice to put the semicolon. Okay. All right. So if I execute this, we made the same mistake. We did not put the output, right? Repeating mistakes are not good. All right. So let's execute again. If you scroll down, you can see 15, 58, and 251. Questions? Is it clear, guys? Any questions?
I guess after reviewing it, because right now I'm too confused the last question, so.
What is the last question?
No, I said after reviewing it, because right now I just don't understand, so hopefully
Okay.
after class I'll review it, then I'll be able to ask questions.
Sure. No problem. Okay, what is the
Let
me do?
It
Yes.
will update through this when we are calling this store procedure. It will update the base table, right?
Absolutely yes. I mean, because there's no concept of base table in start procedure because you are directly dealing with that persistent table. The base table comes into play in the cursor in cursor and views and those kind of things. Here there's no concept of base table because you are dealing with the persistent table directly. All these update statements, you are executing it against the persistent table directly. So there's no concept of base table.
Okay. And in this, when we are printing the value, that will give the different because we already update in the before store procedure, right? That's why it will give different.
Because when we keep on executing that update statement, like we did that 4 or 5 times, so those employees with the vacation hours less than 25 initially, now they move to the second category because we did update couple of times. So that's the reason why you will see the value is changing from the first result set to the second result set. Is that what you are asking me? Why the
Yes.
dot? Yes, that is it. Because I'm executing that update statement multiple times, those employees are get upgraded from group 1 to group 2.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel,
Yes.
just the example we did, I think we can do this using cursor as well. So, you don't have to call this like this and that. So,
Well, when you are using
what
the cursor,
situation like this, which one you prefer?
well, cursor, I mean, when you are calling the cursor, how do you call the cursor? I mean, from your application, for example, I want to call from your .NET application, you want to call a block of code. When calling, you need to specify what is going to be the incremental value for each group. So if you, in the cursor, it's everything is going to be hard coded. There's no concept of a parameter, right? There's no
Yeah.
concept of parameter. So if you cursor will do the same thing, but you need to hard code the value, what is going to be the incremental vacation hours for each group. But if you are doing it in a start procedure from your application or from a user can just call that start procedure, providing the incremental values for the vacation hours for 3 different groups, and then that is done. So one single call for that start procedure, and the start procedure behind the scene will execute this. But if you are using a cursor, well, it is your responsibility to execute the entire cursor statements, and then you also need to hard code the value, what is going to be the incremental ones.
Yeah, but my question is like you have like an incremental value 5 to 1. It's not dynamic, it's a static value. So why do you can just declare the variable with that incremental value and
Well, I can keep on calling this start procedure by just changing the value here, right? In the case of a cursor,
yeah, if you have like a dynamic parameter, you are right. But if you have a static parameter,
when you're calling from the start procedure, let's say you are calling the start procedure from your .NET application, you can make these values dynamic. Okay, whatever the user input is, that can be plugged into this variable and then just call that start procedure with that value. You don't really need to, when you are calling from your client application, you are not going to hard code this value like this. Instead of that, from the in almost any client application, .NET, or I'm not sure about Java or C#, PHP, I know that it is there. You can, from .NET, you can call a start procedure. When you're calling the start procedure, from the application, you can, through the application, you can provide those input parameters. You don't need to hard code that value.
yeah, I understand that if you have a situation, it's going to be a dynamic value all the time, then
Yes.
yeah, it makes sense.
Yes.
But if your value is going to be a static one, then
well, still I prefer the start procedure because it is pre-compiled and less traffic because of those reasons. I prefer the start procedure comparing to the cursor.
okay.
Any other questions? What if the number of input and output parameters are not the same? Yes, that's a good question. What if the number of input parameter and output parameter is not the same? SQL engine will generate an error. The number of input parameter and output parameter has to be the same. Any other questions? Okay, so it's a good time to take a break. It's 9:59. Come back at 10:05. We will continue our discussion. 5 minutes break. Okay, not 5, 6.
Daniel,
Yes.
as you said that input parameter is not equal to output parameter, then it raised the error. In before example, input parameter is 1 and output parameter is 2. Before, like, go up in this, and we can say that.
No. What I said, I'm sorry, I put that in the wrong way. The number of parameters in the start procedure. Okay, the number of parameters you define in the start procedure doesn't matter whether it's input or output. The number of parameters listed here should be same as the number of parameters in the calling program. So in the start procedure here you have 3 parameters, right? So when you call the start procedure, those 3 parameters should be there. I shouldn't be saying that the number of input parameters should be same as. That is a wrong statement. The number of parameters should be the same.
Okay, if we use like if we don't want to use group 3, then it will raise the error, right?
Yes, you still, even if you don't want to use it, you still want to provide that. You need to provide a null value or a null value or 0 character string, depends on the data type, so that it still be there but not doing anything.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll be back, guys. 2 minutes. Okay. Dolapo, I see your email now. Yeah, you call me. Yes, I mean you're right. I mean I forgot to respond back. Yeah, I understood your situation. I mean that's perfectly fine. Oh, all right. So let's continue here. All right. So the examples we have seen so far, we are passing scalar values. I mean, scalar value means for each parameter, you are passing a single value into the start procedure, as well as when the start procedure return a value, that is also going to be a scalar, means it is going to be only one single value for each parameter. Now, one of the question came up today's class is there any way you can pass arrays? And unfortunately, arrays are not supported. Now, the next question is it possible you can pass a tabular structure into a start procedure? From SQL Server 2008 onwards, you can pass tabular structure or a table into a start procedure as an input parameter. So let's see how you can do that. Okay. All right. So passing the concept of passing a tabular structure into start procedure as a parameter is what we call as table value parameter. So what we are going to do is the same example. If I want, instead of providing three different, because for when you're calling the start procedure, you are passing three parameters, right? Instead of having three parameters, is it possible, I can create a single column table which consists of values for all the three groups? So if that is what your intention is, let me modify the start procedure first. So I'm going to copy this. Going to rename that as TVP, table value parameter. Okay, I'm going to call it as TVP. All right, all these things will go away. I mean, let me talk about how to create the TVP first, and then come back and then make modification to this particular start procedure. All right, so if you want to pass a value into start procedure as a table or a tabular structure values into a start procedure, well, a couple of things we need to do first. We need to create something called as a table type. All right. Let me put this bullet points in case if you want to refer back later. Table value parameters. All right, so the first step to create a table value parameter is you need to create a table type. I will explain what that table type. We have, when you're creating the table, you have seen how to use various data types, right? So in SQL Server, you can create your own type, and one of the type is called as table type. You can declare your own table type. Now I will show you what it is. When you see the actual example, it is going to be very clear. I'm going to create something called as a table type. It's a persistent object. Now the name of the table type is, so it's going to be create type, and I'm going to call this one as employee EMP group vacation increment. All right. So that is going to now the type I am going to make this type as table. So this is going to be a table type. Now table type, when you're declaring a table type, you need to define the variables associated with that. I'm going to call this one as group number, group number, and this is going to be an integer, and vacation increment. This is going to be also going to be an integer. All right. So this is, so I'm going to create a table type called as EMP group vacation increment, and two columns associated with that. One is the group number, second one is the vacation increment. All right, so this is a persistent object. So when I execute this, so this is created. Now that this is like a data type. So when you're declaring a variable, you can refer back, you can say declare variable, and then in place of a data type, you can say EMP group vacation increment. Okay. All right. So let's go, and so once it has been created, it's a one-time thing. You don't really need to keep on creating it. So you created your table type. Now, when you call the start procedure, if you want to declare a variable with this particular data type, then declare. I'm going to call it as it's a tabular data type. So tab EMP vacation so and so. All right, what does that mean, guys? Are you clear on this? I'm declaring a variable, and the variable data type is going to be EMP group vacation increment. What is this EMP group vacation increment?
Table.
It's a table. It's a table type you defined, right? And if I execute this, it is going to create a variable in memory. And what is going to be the structure of that variable?
Rows and columns.
Rows and columns. How many columns?
One.
Two columns,
Okay.
right? So this particular variable is having two columns, and the column names are group number and vacation increment. Those are the two columns. All right. So let's try that. So I can insert record into. So I can say insert into in place of a regular table. I can use this variable because this is pretty much like a in-memory table. Okay. Values. It's going to be group 1, comma 5. Two comma 2, 3 comma 1, something like that. So I inserted 3 values here, put a comma here. All right. Now after that, now after that I can perform a select statement here. So if I do the select star from, all right. So let's see whether it really works, right? Okay. So you can declare a variable as a particular data type, and then you can insert record into that particular variable, and then because it is a variable, you can easily pass that as an input parameter to the start procedure, right? So if you want to pass a input parameter as a tabular structure, very simple. You declare a variable. So declare a type, data type as a tabular with data type, and then you create a variable based on that. Then insert the values into that variable, and then once that the variable contains all this tabular record, you can pass that variable as an input variable to the start procedure. Make sense, guys?
And Daniel?
Yes.
How much data this can hold?
I believe there is no limit on how much data can be held by the table variable. I do not know that. I don't think there is a limit for that. In the row constructor, yes, there is a 1,000 core record limit, but the memory table, there's no limit on what is the maximum. I do not know. I believe there's no limit. I can certainly check for that. Check for you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So now I want to call the start procedure by passing this. So my requirement is that I want to modify that start procedure in such a way that instead of passing all these three group values, I just want to pass that input parameter. So in my start procedure, if I'm expecting a variable which consists of tabular structure, things you need to do is, all right, so I need to, where am I now? All right. I'm going to call it as param, okay? Parameter, because a lot of names are very similar here. So the data type is going to be this one. Bear with me for a second. All right. So I declared an input parameter here, and the parameter name is param1. Okay, let's make it a simple param1, and the data type is going to be EMP group vacation increment. Anybody remember what is this data type is?
Table type.
Tabular data type.
Right, tabular data type. Okay, so parameter 1 is going to be a tabular data type. All right, so so when you are calling that start procedure with that parameter, well, that value is the tabular structure is going to be received by this particular parameter. All right, so the next step is, where is it? We need to retrieve, because we don't have separate values, right? So what we need to do is, in place of that, I can say select, what was the name? I forgot. The select vacation increment from parameter 1, where group number equals 1. Does that make sense? So in place of that actual one, what you are trying to do is that you are trying to find the vacation increment for group number 1 record from param 1. And similarly, same changes need to be done for other ones. So let's see whether it really works. It's going to be 2, and this is going to be 3. All right. Now these, I'm not passing any, I'm not retrieving. I mean, if you want, you can, but I'm going to take this one out. I'm not returning any values back. The number of records has been updated, so just take it out. All right, so let's see whether you could able to create this, or will it generate an error? All right, did go through fine. Now, I mean, I can print out, I can create a print statement here to show the total number of records being updated. So let's do that. Instead of passing a record back, I can say print row count. So print row count for each of this statement. All right. Alter. That's just for our own clarification purpose. All right, so I created now let's do a recap here. I created a start procedure which is going to accept an input parameter, and the data type for that input parameter is EMP group vacation increment, which is nothing but a 2-column data type, right? And then then I'm trying to retrieve value for each of those record, and then trying to find what is a vacation increment for group 1. Here I'm trying to find the vacation increment for group 2. Here I'm trying to find the vacation increment for group 3, and that vacation increment hours is going to be added to the existing one. Okay.
I'm not sure if there was any way you define that param1. How does the param1 get its data?
The param, because we are going to see, because we just created that start procedure. Now when you call the start procedure, we need to pass a value into the parameter. That's what we always do, right? When you declare a start procedure, you declare the parameter here. Now that the value for that parameter will be passed from the calling program, right? So you can see int vac increment underscore group 1 here. This is a normal input parameter, right? So same thing. This is a input parameter. The value for that input parameter is going to be provided by the calling program. Is that what you asked me?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, all right. All right, so the next step is how to call this start procedure. So if I want to call the start procedure.
Daniel, you alter the store procedure which we created right now?
No, we actually copied it.
Yeah, copied it, and after that when we created, you altered that, because you know in third one you have 2+ and you're not getting error.
The 2+, where is that?
Yeah.
Where is the 2+?
Third one, last, like group 3.
Third.
Yeah, line update statement. Group numbers.
Station hours ++.
123, line number 123.
123. All right.
Yeah.
Maybe I did not did that. So let's do that. Alter. Well, that's a good thing to point out. So let's. All right. So now it did go through. All right. Great. Okay. So now let's go back here. Now I want to call this start procedure. So if I want to call the start procedure, nothing fancy. Just call the start procedure the way it's supposed to. So you say what is going to be the only input parameter? This is going to be the only input parameter, right? So you can see that the value, this particular input parameter, this is a variable, and this variable is already having 3 records. So it's a variable with 3 records, 2-column 3-record variable, and you are passing that variable, which is nothing but a tabular structure, into that start procedure. All right, so let's do that. Let me execute this statement. All right, so first time 3 records get in, 3 records get affected, then 39 records get affected, and then finally you have 260 records get affected. Okay, so this is what we call as table value parameter. Yes, what's your question?
And in a message there is a 0 row affected. Why?
0 row affected, 39 to 6. Oh, that is because there is no record comes into the category number 1. The first 3 record get affected. That is for this insert statement. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Then the second, the 0 rows affected here. This is for the group 1. There is no employee qualified for group 1. So that's why it is 0. Now the second group we have 39 of them, and the third group we have 260 employees. Clear? All right.
Daniel, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you please go in the store procedure?
Okay.
Okay, in this, we have write the at para 1. What is the work of this variable?
What is the
I mean, we are passing the three variables before in the store procedure, right?
right?
Right now we are passing only one variable. Then how it will work in the place of this three?
Because what is there in this parameter? When you provide a value for this parameter, what value we are trying to provide for this parameter 1?
Table.
It is a tabular structure with a 3 records, right? So that record contains the values you are looking for. So the group 1 value vacation hour increment is 5. The group 2 vacation hour increment is going to be 2. Group 3 it is going to be 1. So those values are already there in that variable as a record. So that's the reason why we need only one parameter needed. So the parameter is going to accept a tabular structure, and then here I'm trying to extract the appropriate vacation increment value for group 1, group 2, and group 3 using a select statement.
Okay.
So
Now
this
I'm
is
getting.
the advantage of using the table value parameter, because let's say you have a start procedure with 20 or 30 different parameters. Instead of defining all those 20 parameters, what you can do is that you can create a table value parameter, and in that table value parameter you can create individual record for each parameter value. All right, and then just pass that table value parameter as the only parameter into the start procedure. Inside the start procedure, you can do a select statement to retrieve the value for each of those original parameters. So table value parameter is primarily used for start procedures which consist of lot of parameters. Sometimes you come across start procedures with what is the maximum number of parameters possible in a start procedure? Anyone? 2100. Okay, that's a pretty large number, right? So if you have too many parameters for a start procedure, we definitely go for a table value parameter, because it makes very easy to pass it, because the readability also it is going to be good if you are passing everything in a tabular format into the start procedure as one single parameter. Okay, guys.
Table value has like 10 or 15 rows. We have to write every time update, or can
Yeah,
just
you need to.
write.
Well, that's the only drawback. Every time if you're passing the record, well, you need to declare it as a variable, and then you need to have appropriate insert statement. So it's a trade-off between
Daniel.
that insert statement and the explicit listing of parameters.
Daniel.
Yes.
And right here you inserted the value into that table value parameter, right? So can you directly load the values from a table on this parameter?
Absolutely, yes. If you want us to, if you store the value into if the value is available in a persistent table, and then from a persistent table, if you want to load that into that table value parameter, same thing. It's an insert with a select statement.
Oh, okay.
Daniel, you said that it's only read only. You return in a store procedure.
That is
so
part
what
of
the means?
When you are passing a table value parameter, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. When you are passing a table value parameter into the start procedure, the read only is part of the syntax. That's how it is identifying that it is not a scalar value, it is a table value parameter.
Yep.
All right. Now, one more thing I want to discuss with start procedure is, anybody remember what are the 3 with options we discussed with user defined function? And I mentioned that is same thing available with views and functions as well.
With encryption,
with
schema
schema
binding, with execute as.
With execute as. All right. So for start procedure, you have one more called as with recompile. With recompile. It's a guaranteed certification question here. Oh, so what is this with recompile means? So I mentioned that when you are creating a start procedure, all the statements inside that start procedure is going to be precompiled. So when precompile means it is already having a precompiled execution plan in memory. That's what we discussed as the first thing in tonight class, right? Now, do you think or in what scenario the precompiled execution plan is going to be not a good thing? Most of the time, precompiled execution plan, we always say that it's a good thing to have. But in what scenario the precompiled execution plan is not recommended? Anyone? Well, what if a table, what is an execution plan? Execution plan is a plan of attack. Now, the way the SQL engine generate the execution plan is based on what kind of data available in a particular table at the time that execution plan is created, right? So if you have a table which is constantly changing, if you have a table where data is constantly changing, then the execution plan already created and stored in memory can get outdated very quickly, right? There's a lot of new routes are coming in your area. The GPS map, the Google map you have, or the GPS map, the map loaded into a GPS system might get outdated very quickly. Okay, same concept here. So if in a start procedure you are using tables constantly get updated, then the drawback of reusing an in-memory execution plan is that execution plan might not be an optimal one, or the execution plan you are trying to reuse from memory might not give the best performance because that is an outdated plan based on the updated data. So if you are trying to deal with tables constantly get changing, you don't want to reuse your in-memory execution plan. So if you want to force the SQL engine not to use the precompiled execution plan from memory, you can say with recompile. So every time when that start procedure get called, that start procedure is going to be recompiled. Now you need to be very careful about this because this recompile option is going to take a lot of time. Now, is it worth to spend time on recompile the execution plan and then execute the start procedure, or use a slightly outdated execution plan in memory? That's something you need to weigh and decide which one you need to go for. Is that clear? What is that with recompile option is? When you say with recompile, it is not going to reuse in-memory precompiled execution plan. Instead of that, every time when the start procedure is called, it is going to create a brand new execution plan.
Daniel?
Yes.
So what do you mean by constantly updating a data?
Like if you have, let's say you have a stock transaction table, or if you have a sales order detail table where there are a lot of, let's say you have a e-commerce application where there are 40 or even 10 or 20 transactions happening every minute. So in every minute, there is going to be at least, as an average sale consists of, let's say, 3 items. So every minute, there is going to be 60 records is adding to that table, right? So any execution plan created as based on sales order detail table will get outdated so quickly because every minute there is going to be 60 new record get added. That's what I say, constantly changing or constantly updating tables. A table where records constantly get updated, inserted, or deleted. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So that is that with recompile option is. We have chat window here. Is it better to run stat? Yeah, you can run stat, but again, there are some drawbacks. Statistics, rebuilding the statistics is going to take some time and resource. Now, how frequent you want to create, you want to refresh the statistics, that is another question. We'll be seeing all those things in the DBA side, the statistics. because statistics is what get used for SQL engine to generate the execution plan. Now, a couple of other conditional branching statements which you can use in start procedures. The one which we have seen, what are the 2 or 3 or 4 actually? We actually, so 4 conditional branching statement, which are they? While loop, right? For looping, it is going to be while. You have the if else condition. Then you can use the case statement. Then there's one more, try catch, right? So there are 4 of them we have already seen. Now, another conditional branch, it's a useless one, but just for academic purpose, you need to know what it is. So hold on a second, let me go to, all right. All right, so the best way we can, I can explain that go to is this start procedure, okay? I'm going to copy this start procedure with the requirement. I mean, this is the first start procedure we wrote today, where you are passing a product ID and it's going to return the total units sold and total revenue. So I'm going to make it as an example for another conditional branching statement called as go to statement. And go to statement. So in this scenario, I mean, if based on this, if this particular product, the product ID which passing in is not never been sold, you have an if else statement for that, right? So what I want to do here is, instead of doing that, make some modification here, okay? If it doesn't exist, copy this. Let me do this first, and then I will show you what I'm talking about here. Go to let's say my error 1, and then colon. All right, so this is a very interesting statement. So, I mean, what I'm trying to, so our requirement is that it is going, we need to create a start procedure, where that start procedure could accept a product ID as an input parameter. For loop is not supported, Yusuf. For is not supported in SQL Server. So you need to pass an input parameter, and based on the, which is going to be a product ID, and then I define the total revenue generated for that product and total units sold. Okay. Now, if I want to use the go to statement to handle the the zero record get, if that particular product never been sold, then I want to use a go to statement to pass a zero value back to the calling program. I mean, again, go to is not a popular one. It's an outdated concept, but still it's supported because it's an ANSI 92 standard. So the first thing I'm going to check is that, hey, whether there is any sales for this particular product. And if there is no sales, then inside that begin and end, I say go to my error one. Now, what is that my error one? My error one is more like a label. It's more like a book label. Now, what's you're telling the SQL engine, go to followed by my label called as my error one. So what SQL engine will do, the moment SQL engine see this go to my error one, it is going to scan through rest of the statement looking for a label called as my error one. And you can see that label I defined here, my error one colon. When you say something with colon, SQL engine identify it as or consider it as a label. So what happened? The control will transfer from go to my error to the my error label, and then it will execute whatever statement under that my error label. And now the most important question is, once all the three statements under the my error label is executed, is it going to come back to the next statement, which is the select statement? Do you think that's going to happen?
Yes.
No, it never come back, because this is a conditional branching statement, and that statement is not going to come back and execute rest of the statement now. So what I'm trying to say is that if the product you are passing, the product ID you are passing it never been sold, then it is going to hit this go to my error. So the control, instead of executing the statements, it is going to pass the control to my error, and then it is going to execute all the statements under that, and the start procedure is done. If the product ID you are passing in is already having a sales, that means this condition is going to be false. So this statement is not going to be executed. So it is going to execute the select statement, and then it is going to return whatever that value assigned to that output parameter. Now the my error is not going to be executed by itself. My error is going to be executed only when you say go to followed by my error one. So go to is a crude way of conditional branching. So that's why it's not popular, but you need to at least know what that go to is, how it is worked. And one of the common questions we always hear is, in the case of a go to, whether it is going to return that control back to the next available statement. Answer is no. That's very true for try catch. In the case of a try catch, once it hit the catch block, it is not going to go back and then execute remaining statements in the try block now. Right? Okay. So that is another statement. Now, two other commands we frequently see in certification exam. Yes, yes. All right. So wait. Let's see. All right. So normally we will use this statement in the DBS side. For example, if you're trying to rebuild an index, rebuilding an index depends on the size of the table and what kind of columns you use in the index. Index rebuilding process might take some time, maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, depends on the size of the index. Now, in your start procedure, you are trying to rebuild an index. The syntax for rebuilding an index, there are a couple of ways you can rebuild the index. So I'm not really peculiar about which syntax I'm using, but I assume that I'm trying to rebuild an index, and then I want to, after rebuilding the index only, I want to execute the next statement. Okay, or if you want to put some kind of a time lag between two statements, Normally what happens is that if one statement get executed, it is going to continue with its next statement, right? But if you want to put a wait time between two different statements, you have two options. You can say wait for time followed by whatever that time is. So let's this, because this is a common interview question and certification question. What is the difference between wait for time and the second option is wait for delay? Anybody know what's the difference between wait for time and wait for delay? If you put
Means
that,
Wait for time.
Mhm.
We wait
if
for
we
delay.
pull, if he is saying that time, then he has to wait for 23 dot dot 0, and if he saying that delay, then get like what's the time right now and plus 2.
Yes. So wait for delay means, okay, whatever the time now, add 2 more hours. So if I add this wait for, go back here, I have a multiple statement here, right? After the first update statement, if I say wait for delay 2 hours, that means after executing the print command, it is going to wait there for 2 hours before it continue with the next statement. But if I say the next statement is wait for time, so instead of wait for delay, if I say wait for time 23, then the second update statement is executed at 11 o'clock. Okay, so that is a, so if you want to put some kind of a delay between two statements, you have two options: wait for time and wait for delay.
Daniel,
Yes.
can you repeat the wait for time, please? The last one?
The wait for time means it will wait for that particular time. For example, if I execute that wait for time of 23 is nothing but 11 o'clock, right? 11 p.m. So my next statement is going to be executed at 11 p.m. Eastern time.
That means the exact time, I mean that
Exact time,
mentioned.
yes. Exact time.
Daniel,
Yes.
when do you use this? I believe you don't use it for like a stored procedure and things like that.
No, normally we don't use it. Only time we use it is if you are trying. Only, please mute the microphone. Only time you use it is if you have a statement which is going to take some time, and you want to execute the next statement only after that time-consuming statement get executed. That is when we provide that wait for time, the wait for delay or wait for time. And most of the time you will see that in the database administration side, especially with index rebuilding. Is that what you asked me?
There is no way to know how long some statements gonna
Yeah,
take to
unfortunately.
execute, right?
Yeah, that's something you need to make a wide guess. What is going to be the time taken for the other statement to be completed.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions, guys? If not, I can wind up the class for tonight. And tomorrow we are going to officially start our DBS session, starting with indexes.
Daniel, can we use this wait for time and wait for delay in the trigger and all?
Wait for time and wait for time, wait for delay and wait for time can be used anywhere. Start procedures, triggers, views, not views, the functions, wherever you want, you can use those statements. Don't think that it is usable only used only in start procedures. No, it is universally supported in SQL Server.
Okay, and can we use the trigger or cursor inside the store procedure?
Absolutely yes. Not trigger. Why you want to use a trigger inside? Because trigger get fired when you are doing a DML or DDL statement, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you can use the cursor inside the start procedure. but you cannot use a trigger. You can use user-defined function. You can use views. All those can be used inside the start procedure.
Okay.
All right.
I have a question on the lab.
Okay. Okay, guys, the class is over. We will meet again